We're just starting. I've got two of you, Cynthia, and you're in time.
Yeah, I'm going into my laptop.
Yeah, you are featured twice, so there we go, back to one now. Okay, we're ready to go. Good day, folks, and welcome to today's Whistleblower Webinar, where we're going to be covering the all-important topic of whistleblowing in South Africa and its role and the impact in the fight against corruption. And it goes without saying that the fight against corruption is made a lot easier when we've got good number of systems in place. So some of these being good laws, which I think we have a great constitution, a lot of laws that that help us fight corruption. You need functional mechanisms as well within the criminal justice system to hold those accountable who commit the crimes. And then, which is very pertinent to today's topic, very good, strong information that is brought to the fore and able to bring strong charges against perpetrators of corruption and fraud. So but the purpose of today's session is not to delve too deeply into the functionality of the criminal justice system, which has its challenges, particularly in the areas of the capacity within the NPA, the police, and there's this growing concern of corruption within the rank and file of the police. But instead we want to look today at that very important aspect which aids and improves this fight against corruption, being that of whistleblowing. And as you know, the criminal justice system, as it improves, as it has over the last year, with the appointment of Shamila Batoy within the NPA, the investigative directorate with Hermione Cronier, so too does this willingness for people who have got information to come forward to halt this wrongdoing. So we believe there's a distinct correlation between the efficacy of justice being meted out within the system and the extent of whistleblowing that takes place. Whistleblowers are not confident to give input when there's a high probability that their information will not be used and nothing will really happen. It's just all done in vain. So we're at a good stage and a good space in the country as things get better. 18 months ago, things were very different in South Africa. What we can also tell you is that in OUTA we work very hard to fight the scourge of corruption that eats away at the soul of our ability to grow as a nation. And we all know that with corruption comes lost revenues that could have been well spent in education, housing, sanitation, and health. And all of this benefits society at large, and more so the poorest of the poor. And for this to happen, our reliance at OUTA is very high when it comes to whistleblowers, extremely high. When we get good, valuable information on fraud and corruption activity that's going down, it makes our job so much easier to lay the charges, to give strong cases to the criminal justice system. And that way we can hold the perpetrators to account. So we need this information. But I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panel today. Firstly, let me introduce Cynthia Stimpel, who, if you haven't met before or heard of, is the former manager of Treasury in the department, in the Treasury Department at SAA, and she was very instrumental in exposing transactions that were going down. As a result of these actions, she was purged from the organization, and you and I, the taxpayer, were saved about 250 million rand of unnecessary expenditure, and probably a lot more as a result of Cynthia's actions and the steps that she took to challenge Duvenage and the corrupt cabal that was beginning to run rampage within the ranks of SAA, and doing a lot of damage to this once proud airline. So welcome, Cynthia. Nice to have you on board. Then I'd like to introduce Alison Tilley, who has been at the head of advocacy of special projects in the Open Democracy Advice Center and is currently a coordinator at Judges Matter. Alison is an attorney and a consulting professional with an LLB from UCT. highly experienced in advocacy and the rights of whistleblowers, having qualifications and experience and skills in legislative policy and legal analysis, legal writing, and just assisting NGOs to develop and manage themselves in the space. And we're really pleased, Alison, that you can join us today. And then finally, somebody that I don't think needs much introduction. You've either heard her on radio, you've read her columns, you've probably even read some of her books. Mandy Wiener, thank you for joining us today as well. And let's start with you, Mandy. You know, you've just released your book published by Macmillan titled The Whistleblowers. It's your 5th book, by the way. And we'll be giving 3 copies of this away to randomly selected participants at the end of the webinar. We'll announce the names of who will be the recipients of this great book. But you wrote it in a lovely way, Mandy, that provides and gives a series of accounts of stories and events that whistleblowers have had to endure, and the toll that these events took on their lives, and not only on the whistleblowers' lives, but their families and friends. And some of them have paid the ultimate price, which is death. Or if not, they've been ostracized, they've been fired, they've lost their livelihoods. And you reflect in your book that both the public and private sector, around a quarter of the time, people are intimidated or they fear losing their jobs, often their lives, but when doing the right thing, especially when it comes to reporting unethical behavior. So the question I've got for you, Mandy, is if the ultimate price of whistleblowing is almost always an unpleasant one, why is it that we have any whistleblowers? I mean, can you elaborate on this aspect that came out in the writing of your book?
Thanks so much, Wayne, and thank you so much for having me, and hello to everyone. And this is such an important conversation, so thank you. Well, biggest concern when I met the whistleblowers was that people would get to the end of the book and would feel bereft, that they would decide not to blow the whistle. And that really is the opposite of what I want to achieve. Is I want more whistleblowers to come forward, because the contribution that they make to society is so profound and so important that we need to encourage them. But as you say, if you speak truth to power and power constantly prevails, then why should people come forward? And that is the concern. And in most of the cases that I look at in the book, the majority of cases, unfortunately, result has maybe been a good outcome for the country. So money has been returned to the fiscus, or companies have been held to account. There's been a positive outcome holistically, but for the individual that comes forward, the result hasn't always been positive. They are treated as pariahs or impimpies, as troublemakers. They are pushed to the fringes of society. Many of them suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. They are unemployable. They wear the scarlet letter W. And that has to change. We have to change the way that we treat whistleblowers, because if we are going to encourage whistleblowers to come forward, we have to stack the cards in their favor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think turning to you, Cynthia, I mean, you're a whistleblower. And I've got to check myself when I say that, because, you know, I'm not sure how you and others in your position feel about that title. Is it something that one embraces or not? Because first and foremost, you're a wife, you're a family person, a mother, and you were a well-respected manager working at SAA, a strong brand at the time. And then things changed. And I recall meeting you in 2016 when you made contact with OUTA at the time. And that sense of depression and frustration that you were going through. Please take a couple of minutes and just explain to us what led you to that decision to take that stand. Cynthia. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, you're on mute. You meant. I think you're still on mute. There we go. Something's happening there. No, I can't hear you. You might have to switch over, Cynthia, to, or just check your sound. There we go. Something happened there? No, you're still on mute. So try and come on board. Keep testing it, Cynthia. Keep saying hi. but we still can't hear you. I'm going to ask Alison in the meantime just to come in here while you try and sort that out. Still nothing? Cynthia? No? I can't. How do I change that one? There we go. You've switched it on, but for some reason your audio is still off. Let us fix that. In the meantime, Alison, I'd like to ask you to come in here. You've spent a lot of time assisting whistleblowers to attend to their plight and challenges. And one thing we're often faced with is the question of the assistance that we give to whistleblowers who are faced with having to get legal advice when it comes to defending themselves against unfair dismissals and being purged from these organizations. So what is your experience here, and how do you feel civil society should be playing a role in this regard?
I think, and thank you for the invitation to join you, but I think legal advice for whistleblowers is only a part of what of what support whistleblowers need. The legislation that we have for whistleblowers tends to protect whistleblowers in the workplace, and there have been many important concerns raised by whistleblowers in that context. But I think what we need to know is that it's not just something that needs a workplace remedy. Whistleblowers often are subject to quite intensive campaigns from within their organizations, and that can have a knock-on effect in terms of your family life, your mental health. Can battle in terms of, if there are then disciplinary proceedings against you, which is sometimes what happens. You then have to deal with those. So I think what we need to think about is quite a comprehensive response to whistleblowing, which isn't just, well, we'll get you a lawyer, although that is an incredibly important and useful part of it. But I think one of the things that civil society can do, in addition to trying to mobilize legal help, is provide the sort of support to the person in a more holistic sense. So somebody who can talk to the whistleblower, go through the story for the 120th time, when your family just don't want to hear another word, that there's somebody who will listen and think about it with you and think about those next steps. And I think that's something that civil society is well placed to provide in terms of support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one sees that, Mandy, in your book as well. And Cynthia, I think you found that that's where you had to ultimately go to. I'm not sure if your sound is on yet. Do you want to? No, your sound is still not on. We've got to fix this. But without a doubt, Alison, this is what we see so often. And Mandy, maybe you want to reflect on that need, because you have so often in these organizations the internal hotlines, so to speak, the whistleblowers lines where people are supposed to feel safe, and yet that's not the case. But Alison, why not government?
Well, I think government is often in an interesting position in these matters, as we have seen over the last 10 years in South Africa. I think there have been points at which whistleblowers simply would not have trusted or had confidence in a system run by any part of government. And I think one of the examples is the Public Service Commission running a hotline. And the difficulty with that is you raise the concern with the Public Service Commission, and then what happens is that they refer the problem
We might have Cynthia on again. So, Cynthia, you there? Sorry about that, Alison.
Can
Cynthia,
you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Lovely. Rather keep it like that.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Lovely. Okay,
Sorry, everyone. I have these technological problems in my home. Yes, just to answer your first question, how it was that I came to OUTA and what drove me there, and also the term of whistleblowing. I didn't like the term right up front, and I didn't embrace it either, and I couldn't see or call myself whistleblower until I met with Wendy Addison. And her words to me was, in fact, to a few of us, and just said, embrace it and wear it like the cape you deserve to wear as a heroine. And since then, I thought, well, why not? How I came to be a whistleblower was not out of choice. Hello, can you hear me still?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was more out of need when you realize that there's a problem and how do you deal with it. So it's not that you wake up at one morning and say, this is what I'm going to do. It's actually a process. You get the first inkling either through documentation or a meeting, something is not following the proper processes and the governance process, and you're uncomfortable. You talk to your colleagues, which I did. I spoke to my colleagues. None of the colleagues express their concerns, but nobody wants to take action. So it becomes the next thing happens. Like the first for me was a board.
Frozen there a bit. Sorry, Cynthia, really interesting part of the discussion, but you're frozen. I think something's happened. All right, Cynthia's going to try and get back in again.
They did that, nothing. So eventually decide who else, and that's when I report. And they were the first ones to react. So I think all whistleblowers would tell you that it's never just a sudden idea. It's a process of how and where, even though you look up legislation, you look up who do I go to, like the ethics, for instance. I looked at the Ethics Institute, but they have no mechanism. I reported on Corruption Watch, but they have a small section where you can't interact with people. So it's either you physically get to a point where you can interact with people, or there's a quick turnaround if you have put an email through. So if that answers the first two questions. Thank you, Wayne.
Yes, no, thanks. And let's keep you on. We can hear you clearly, we can't see you, but that's fine, because it's very important that we get that insight. And so what we gather from your experience, Cynthia, is there was a lot of learning. This isn't a light switch moment. It's not a case of, right now I'm going to blow the whistle and it's all laid out and it's clear cut. It was a journey of discovery, absolute frustration, and having to go from pillar to post. I know you also lodged your complaint with the Treasury, who's supposed to be the guardians of money flows at SAA, and this was extremely frustrating for you. So thanks for sharing that. We're going to come back to you shortly, Cynthia, because we want to digest some of the elements therein. But to Mandy, reading your book, I enjoyed the way you went into depth with the various stories you wrote about, searching and researching for what transpired before and after the incident, where people decided to speak up. Some of them never getting around to actually doing so with their assassinations, and the assassins still walking freely in the streets of towns and cities. But people like Jimmy Motlala in Bombela, Nelspruit, that is who'd grown up and grown in the political ranks and needed to speak up about corruption. I think it was pertaining to the development of the stadiums around Soccer World Cup time. And then there's Mos Faku, who also grew up as an activist and grew through the political ranks in local government in Rustenburg, also assassinated. Such tragic stories. Tell us about what it is that you saw in the minds of these whistleblowers, or through the minds of their family members, who probably most likely knew of this looming threat and danger to themselves, and yet they proceeded and continued to expose these issues, Mandy.
Yeah, I mean, those were the most difficult stories, definitely, that I covered in the book. Cynthia, I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, if you can maybe put your microphone on mute, because there's quite a bit of feedback coming through in my ear. I'm not sure if anyone else can hear it. But yeah, the stories particularly of Jimmy Mohlala, who was the speaker of the municipality in Mangaung, who spoke out about corruption involving the 2010 stadiums, and he was shot dead. And I did an interview with his son, Tsepiso Mohlala, and also with his wife, Bonnie. And the stories were really resonated with me, because here you have somebody who was in the ANC, who was a politician, who really, had altruistic motives, and who spoke out against corruption, and he was shot dead for that. And I thought that there would be a lot of bitterness and a lot of animosity, even though it was 10 years later. But Tsepiso said to me that his father left him a legacy of truth. And I just thought that that was so significant and such a mature way to look at it. And very similarly, if you look at the story of Mos Pakwe in Rustenburg, again, here's somebody who spent his life in the organization, who was a grassroots activist, who was very involved in the council in Rustenburg, and he did everything in his power to speak out about corruption. He went all the way to the president. He went to senior members of the organization. And eventually, he came face to face with the people that he was accusing of corruption. And a few days later, he was shot dead. And the results that has had for his family have just been devastating. You know, they've lost everything. His son Tlolo Pakwe, also just an incredible young man who has had to carry that burden. And this is the price, unfortunately, particularly in political circles. We're seeing so many assassinations, so many targeted hits of people, and we're going to see more of that, unfortunately, is my concern, as we see the net tighten and more arrests taking place. And that's a real worry. You know, if you're faced with the prospect of death for blowing the whistle and speaking up, you know, what is the price? What is the cost? And that simply can't be one of the implications for you if you're going to speak up, that you're faced with death. It just can't be.
Yeah, it certainly can't. And one's got a sense in reading the book that their family members, some knew that this was going to happen, or this was a strong likelihood, while others, I think you could see in one of the stories I think it was with Jimmy, where he kept it quiet. He kept the threats. He understood them. To himself largely, didn't want to alarm and alert his family too much and create the alarm. But I think had they known, maybe things would have been different. So it's very, very
well. Yeah, it's really interesting the way that whistleblowers deal with telling their families and keeping them informed. And in fact, with some of the state capture whistleblowers, I describe them as having a hollowness, that there's like a slice missing from their souls. And I actually compare them to people that, like soldiers that go to war and then come back and have been in a conflict zone, and they can't relate to the people around them. So they can't speak to their family members or friends about it, because they just don't understand that they've been to hell and back and how they feel about it. And it's just unrelatable. And that's why, more than needing legal support, they need physical support, security, but they also need emotional and psychological support as well. And that's something that we really underestimate.
That's a very important one. It's one of those things of what is civil society, or what do we do, and how does government play a role? I want to come to Alison on that shortly, but while we're in this space of the emotion there, Cynthia, you were there. I think the viewers would love to know what made you decide to go ahead, despite the fact that I imagine you knew that doing so was going to be the end of your career, the end of possibly any career for you. So what was it, Cynthia, that gave you the courage to proceed? I mean, it would have been easy for you to sit back and just go with the flow, remain employed, maybe even get promoted. What did you do? How did you? We just want to know what was going through your mind when you took that step.
Thanks, Wayne. I think there were a couple of issues in that. One was I knew that I could not keep quiet holding the position that I did as group treasurer, so it meant I had to do something about it. The second was that I felt that I wouldn't be worth my salt or worth my the position that I hold if I didn't speak out. The third was that I had already spoken to my family and I had my family support, so I knew I could go ahead with it. They even said, we will look at our savings and find out if we can get you the best lawyers. The other was my own personal conscience and my own integrity, that I felt I needed to do something about it. And then I had a strong faith in God. I know each one of us have a different perception of a higher being, and mine is from the Christian faith side, but I had a strong belief that if I do this, I will get through. Yes, I knew I'd get scarred, I'd be bruised, I'd be everything else, but I'd get through. And it was I also physically, I do a lot of yoga and meditation. And I think from a mental health perspective, that helped a lot. So it's not to say that I wasn't unscarred, but it did help me and focus me to take that step and see it through. Thank you.
Wow. So that's very interesting, Cynthia, because there's quite a few check boxes that I think gave you the moral courage to make that step. It was your family's support. It was that there was a backup. You had your faith. You had given this a lot of thought and discussion. I think your values came in to being and your decision that that's it. I know there's risk. I've got to take this risk. You'd mentally prepared yourself for the bruising and the battering that was going to come. And all of these things add up to this ability to move forward. And I think, well done. This is it's just amazing to hear that. And I'm hoping that this is the stuff that resonates with other whistleblowers out there in the preparedness. Because coming back to Alison, it's so many people find themselves in this void that might not have the financial backing, the family support, and all these boxes that you ticked there, Cynthia. Alison, so we were talking about, support for whistleblowers, whether it's government, civil society, and it's not just legal and financial. I hear you as well. It's more so this giving them the strength and the courage and the mental strength to deal with it. Your experiences there, Alison, please.
Well, certainly in many of the whistleblowers that I've spoken to and worked with, I think many of them have a very strong sense of integrity, and they have a very strong sense of what it is that they need to do. And it's almost quite often as though they can do no other. It's not an option for them to turn a blind eye and cross to the other side of the road. They find themselves in a position where they simply, in order to carry on with a sense of themselves, they have to walk that path. I think what civil society can do, as I say, is look at support that goes beyond legal support and that provides a sort of a family around that whistleblower to help them, carry on doing what they do. But I think we have to acknowledge more broadly that there needs to be legal change, and that what we need to be looking at is ways to make whistleblowers safe, and not just through using workplace remedies, but potentially by using financial recoveries. Because one thing we know is that if a whistleblower has access to a reasonable financial award, they can do things like pay for a therapist. They can do things like move town, get additional security. There's all sorts of things that really help the whistleblower carry on, which really it boils down to money in the end. And I think that's what we've got to think about.
And give us some of your thoughts then in that space around reward, because this is something that has been practiced in other parts of the world. There are reasonable grounds for success there, and a little bit more on the PDA, the Protective Disclosures Act, that you believe should be changed, Alison.
I think the PDA has been reasonably significantly amended in the last 2 years, and I think it's been broadened in many ways that have been useful. But that is very much a workplace remedy. The question we have to ask is, what happens if you are driven out of the workplace? And whistleblowers are often in a position where they, I mean, it sounds dramatic to put it this way, but they know where the bodies are buried, sometimes literally. But they know where the money has been improperly spent.
Yeah. And
if you can work a system out of getting that whistleblower to come forward and act to recover that money, I mean, let's say it's a contract that shouldn't have been entered into for 200 million rand. If a whistleblower is able to make sure that that money is recovered and gets 20% of it, well, that then puts them in a significantly different position in terms of their lives going forward. It's no longer a question of, you know, can you get another job? And often you can't. Then you're in a position where you don't have to get another job. Certain other jurisdictions, America is probably the foremost. Their legislation is called the False Claims Act. The neat thing about that is you put the responsibility on the whistleblower and, in their case, the Department of Justice, to recover the money. But the money is recovered against the company who entered into the dodgy deal. And that's a really nice part about it, is because where the state is actually unable to act and unable to make those recoveries, the state that we have seen for certainly the last 10 years and more, that you actually create a different system, a different set of actors who can step in and make those recoveries.
That's interesting. I guess it comes with a lot of challenges as well. So I found that very interesting. It's something that we should explore. Mandy, in your experiences in writing the book, do you think that would help a lot more people come forward, because you were speaking to whistleblowers that acted without those rewards?
So I spent a lot of time in the book looking at the False Claims Act and how successful it's been in America. And there are a lot of positives to that, because if Cynthia has ensured the recovery of 250 million rand to the fiscus, she would get a percentage of that, and it would be a significant percentage as well. The negatives around that, though, is that it opens the door for bounty hunters, which is a concern. And also you have some bottom feeder lawyers who then make a career and you know, just a small segment of the fraternity that then make a career out of obviously chasing these claims. But I do think it is a very successful piece of legislation that we've seen in the States in particular. So I do look at that quite a bit. However, many of the whistleblowers that I spoke to said it's not about the money. So they said that regardless of the fact that they would get an enormous amount of money, they have done it because they were compelled to do so, and they felt that they needed to speak up. But again, as Alison says, that money would allow them to hire their own protection, to pay their bills. If they're unemployed, at least it gives them some security of income. So that will have a significant difference. But when you look at the litigation, and you look at the Protected Disclosures Act in South Africa, which is the primary piece of legislation that covers whistleblowing, all of the whistleblowers that I've spoken to say that they don't think it's worth the paper that it's written on. And I've suggested looking at something like they have in the Netherlands, which is a whistleblower house, where it is essentially a Section 9 organization that is funded by the government, but it's run independently. And they provide legal support, physical support, emotional support, psychological support. And I think that's certainly something that perhaps we should be looking at here.
No, that's interesting, because there is a role then for governments to play, although you've got to be very careful and you don't want them to control and then manipulate the system. But I guess in a place like the Netherlands, it's a lot easier. And I suppose that would help a lot. Cynthia, your thoughts? In your case? Not sure if your sound is on.
So now, definitely, I would agree with that. I did pick it up in your book. So just to show you, I bought your book, Mandy. Yes, I actually like that idea. It may not be associated directly with government and rather independent, but there should be funding then from government in various sources. And hopefully that it's something I've been looking at. We started recently, we've just registered our company called Citizens of Conscience in August. And that is exactly the focus we want to have, is looking at the whistleblower holistically, giving them the support from a traumatic perspective, the psychological, the psychiatric perspective, finding finance for them with through donor funding, and finding lawyers for them through either legal fraternities or those who want to keep their day job, but then help the whistleblower on the side and not charge the earth for their fees, and then really helping that whistleblower keep their dignity rather than become what we do at the end, where we're really struggling just to breathe. So fantastic. I love that idea.
Yeah, I do too, and I guess, Cynthia, it would have covered one of your frustrations. I mean, it shouldn't be difficult to report. I mean, here the internal hotlines that are supposed to be anonymous and that just don't turn out to be what you think they would be, which is, you know, protect you, don't expose you, send in the audit teams, do the analysis, take action, remove the transgressors, and it's you just hope it would be that way. But in your case, it certainly wasn't, and in many of the whistleblowers cases that Mandy speaks about in Alison's experiences of, there's just no one place to go to, and so you find yourself running around from SARS to OUTA and so forth, trying to get something done. I imagine this whistleblower house just takes care of so much of that. In your mind, I mean, because it was frustrating for you, Cynthia, having to just go from pillar to post and say, why isn't anybody listening?
Exactly, and that has been my issue, that even though you report it, people just don't react, and in many cases the reaction is very slow. Well, we're still in the early stages of the organization, and it would be really great to perhaps partner with like overseas companies that have already established just guidance and getting us off the ground and managing that way, because it's a much needed entity in South Africa. I know there's also talk perhaps to leave it like a Chapter 9 organization, but that doesn't get to touching on the ground how people feel and how to keep them in a position of a safe space. And that's where one needs to look at mostly for whistleblowers.
Yes, thanks. Absolutely. Alison, your views on that? That would be possibly a meeting of the minds with civil society, business participating in that space, as well as government assisting with funding, but having this separate entity that could alleviate so much of the frustration and pressure of whistleblowers?
You know, I'm going to sound shockingly cynical. I appreciate that.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Discussion.
You know, I think we have seen the collapse of capacity within government. I think we've seen Chapter 9 institutions being hollowed out. Certainly the prosecuting authority, the police, IPID, you know, the list goes on and on, looking to the state to create a functioning, let's say it's a Chapter 9 institution, which was able to deal with whistleblowing from all levels of government, local, provincial, national, looking at SOEs, looking at you know, the procurement across the board. I simply, frankly, I don't buy it. I don't buy it as an option. I think the fiscal environment that we're in right now, I think if the current Chapter 9s can keep their budgets more or less stable, that's going to be a win. You know, we are on the back foot. So the idea that somehow the government will be able to act in some meaningful way, I would far rather put my faith in individuals who are able to muster the evidence and then act, and obviously they can't act alone, but act in order to recover those monies. I mean, that's back in the day, this is how it was developed. It was developed in the context of the American Civil War, where there was no central state that could act to recover those monies. And that's where we are. In some ways, that's what we have. And I think we have to be really, really realistic and take a hard, cold look at what it is the state can do and cannot do at this time. 10 years from now might be different, but right now,
Good point. No, I take your point. So, you know, it's government becoming the enabler, getting the legislation right, looking at how we can recover some of the recovered funds, and then maybe this is run by civil society. You know, we don't need to rely on government. A lot of the work that we do at OUTA and places like Corruption Watch and Section 27, so many NGOs doing the work that government should be doing, which is holding people to account and getting transparency right. This is something that this whistleblower house is something that could be run by society, civil society. And I think if we got that right, government would probably be compelled to assist in some way, but not allow them to control it in any way. Or to damage it,
Can I just jump in there? So I think it's important to look at what civil society is doing and what's happened over the past few years. So there's actually very few organizations like yourselves, Wayne, that are able to support whistleblowers. So we've got you, which, you know, for example, in the case of Cynthia, has been enormously helpful. And then Corruption Watch as well, which interestingly enough says that 2,000 whistleblowers have come forward in the first half of this year to blow the whistle on PPE procurement. You know, unfortunately, the Right to Know campaign no longer has a whistleblower arm. We know that there are other organizations like the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation that are supportive of whistleblowers as well. And then there's PLUF, of course, and PLUF is really, really significant. If you look at the case of Bianca Goodson, Mosilo Motsepo, Simpiwe Maisela, who was at the PIC, and the way that PLUF works is interesting. I mean, it's largely funded. It's largely funded by French money, but is South African in the way that it operates. And with them, the whistleblower signs a contract, and that is helpful in terms of the security of the legal fees. And I absolutely hear Alison on her cynicism, and I think we all share it at this point. One of the other suggestions from Rosemary Hunter, one of the whistleblowers, is that each sector of business, so for example, the banking sector, has to put a certain amount of money into an organization, and there's a whistleblower organization for that sector that is funded but is independently run. So there are lots of different ideas that we could be looking at, and I agree. I mean, I would absolutely rather put my faith in civil society, but we need more organizations like yourselves that are primarily focused at whistleblowers, that can support whistleblowers and can cover the gap for them, because it's the gap while the big corporates drag the cases through the courts and bleed them dry. That's where they really need the support for those years.
Absolutely, and we find that so often, and you're quite right, and NGOs and civil society like ourselves we struggle with funding ourselves just to do the work, and you want so much to help with the expensive legal cases because they're winnable if you just had the resources and the teams and the expertise. And I think we're going to go into the space because it is one that comes up often, and we are in conversation with other NGOs, civil society. It needs to be a collaborative effort with business. You're so right. Business has a role to play, and I want to come to that just a little bit later on in what is business's case or their role in the space, because they're also missing in action so often. But I want to turn now, Mandy, to reflect on the symbiotic relationship between whistleblowers and the media. You know, you reflect in chapter 6 of this big breakthrough for media and society. We were looking for something on the Guptas, you know, this continuously fobbing off society and the media. And then the Gupta leaks arrived and just gave so much wind into the sails of the media and society to start putting pressure on the administrators to remove and make leadership changes that are so desperately needed. And you know, the problem is that we so often see, Mandy, is that in the media, you know, corruption is headlines today and it's gone tomorrow. And the exposed perpetrators, they just put up with a bit of public defense, fighting off, denying the issues and putting up some smoke and mirrors. And in a few weeks' time, stories moved on. They remain in their jobs, except for the whistleblowers who now are struggling. So what is it between whistleblowers and the media? You want to elaborate on that, because you're in that space and they are so important to your stories, but they feel left out so often.
So there's a great quote at the start of the book from Musilo Motepu, who is the Trillion whistleblower, who is not featured in my book because she's busy writing a book of her own. And in there she says that are the sources that journalists rely on. The journalists get the awards, the NGOs get the funding, the whistleblowers get forgotten about. And that's very much the case, unfortunately. Whistleblowers are absolutely essential to journalists. We rely on sources, and we wouldn't be able to do investigative journalism or any kind of exposés if it weren't for people on the inside who fed us information. So if you look at the Gupta leaks, for example, there you have a situation where we knew all along what was going on, but we couldn't prove it. And then you get Stan and John, who remain anonymous till today, who pop up with this discarded hard drive containing hundreds of thousands of emails from within the belly of the Gupta empire. And because of the role of civil society and someone like Brian Curran, who was the intermediary, and he got this, of course, to Branko at the Daily Maverick and then to Steph at Amabungani, never be in the position today. They essentially brought down a president. They brought down a regime. And that was also because those journalists knew to deal with whistleblowers and how to protect them as a source. And that was their priority. And if you look at the backstory to the Gupta leaks, which is so incredibly told in Anton Harber's new book as well, about how that happened, it's crucial that as journalists we protect whistleblowers and protect our sources and prioritize them to encourage more people to come forward, because there is no way that we would get the evidence. And that was a systemic campaign of not just one story, but story after story after story. And ultimately, there was such an extensive set of evidence against the Guptas and against President Jacob Zuma that he had no choice but to step down. And I think that just shows the absolute crucial role that is played by whistleblowers in this country.
Absolutely, and those leaks become the stories of so many others. Without them, how much would have come forward at the Zonda Commission? How many people and whistleblowers who are now compelled to tell their side of the story? There
was a knock-on effect, exactly. So, a number of the whistleblowers said they saw Fakey Mentor, they saw Mkabisi Jonas at Zondo, and that compelled them. They saw that they needed to join the dots, and that's why more and more whistleblowers came forward, and that's why there needs to be this knock-on effect as well.
There's a domino effect. It's so important. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Alison, on your views on just this information that comes forward, and then to yourself, Cynthia, that why it's just so critical, especially when it's meaningful information. We find meaningful, substantive information. So often we get whistleblowers coming to us with, I think this is happening, and I don't have all the facts, but this is my hunch. And we can do nothing with it because, as you know, Alison, when it comes to taking the matter further and maybe into court, you can't do it on hearsay, you can't do it on frivolous information.
I think it's one of the difficulties that whistleblowers face is that we tend to put a burden on them, which asks them to prove what it is that they're saying. And a whistleblower shouldn't have to prove the wrongdoing. They're raising a concern about the wrongdoing. It's then the organization about whom they're raising the concern that should then be processing that concern and testing it and seeing whether it is true or not. And I think this is the thing that does happen to whistleblowers. It is very difficult to take their case further without at least some verification of what it is that they're saying. Again, I think something that we don't, when we ask whistleblowers to take these steps in the interests of society without due regard for them, I think we're placing a burden on them, but we're not at the same time providing the protections that they need. And I think that's something that we really have to think about. When you have the evidence, yes, the journalists do get to run the stories. Journalists can be careless. I mean, there's certain examples that I'm aware of where, just because they didn't really understand what it was that the whistleblower was doing and how dangerous it was, but they then run the story, and then there's the blowback, and the whistleblower gets affected. So I think I certainly agree with whistleblowers who are like, what about us? Don't we get left out? And I think that is very true.
And that's quite critical in trying to cover up where the whistleblower wants that protection, not to be exposed, and yet that doesn't always happen, because it is sometimes the ball is dropped from the journalistic point of view. But sorry, Cynthia, you had something you wanted to say. We were talking earlier.
Yes. Thank you. Just from a media perspective, it's also how the media portrays the whistleblower. So in my case, they put defiant group treasurer. So if anyone Googles me, it's still there. And when you apply for a job, all they see is this defiant that stands out. You're not going to get a job. So I feel that media, as much as it's good to work with them and that they are exposing, they also need to be a bit more self-critical in how they expose and how they present the whistleblower, because sometimes we are portrayed as the bad person, and that has a long-term effect on that person's character, their integrity, and also just for future jobs. So I would just that they be a bit more aware of that.
I think we don't see it that way. And defiance should be a badge of honor. You defied the system, but I guess there's the other side of that. Corporates do worry about employing defiant people. They want people that and then I guess this is another space where we've got to unpack the role of civil society is getting whistleblowers re-employed. I've certainly believed that whistleblowers are people that companies should want on their organization, that boards should be saying we need these people, and yet we find it's extremely difficult for them to get jobs again. And you've experienced that, Cynthia, and I know you speak about it as well in your book, Mandy. Why is that the case? Because if I'm a director of an organization, I would love people like Cynthia and whistleblowers who are on board, not because I'm worried that they're going to go around looking for another case to blow on, but they are honest, they are hardworking, and they are fearless. And that's what you want in your business, is it not? Cynthia, your views?
I just read last night that Transnet still has not filled its board. And I'm thinking, there's so many whistleblowers out there. Why aren't they looking for us, and to fulfill those positions? So I would agree. It's really important that you start looking at those whistleblowers.
I think you've frozen there.
Value, because most whistleblowers do not do it. They do it actually to save the company. They're doing it because they're loyal to that organization. And so when it's portrayed that the person has committed misconduct, that's what they see rather than the reasons why the person did it. So, and I think the best place is for boards. So I would really appreciate it if civil societies can go out and say, start looking at them, especially if they've got all the experience, use them in boards. because with the board, they can at least give guidance. They will give insight. They will give you some experience, and it's good for boards to know this.
Absolutely. Good point. Something that one could consider in this whistleblower house space, you have a recruitment arm where you can get at a low price excellent people. When I say low price, not the salary, but you don't have to pay these massive personnel agent fees. And here's a group of good, hardworking, honest people that you can bring into your organization without having to pay these massive fees, or they could start funding themselves through that as well. Very interesting. Alison, to you, regarding advocacy, whereby it's recommended that civil society does more. Let's bring business in here, because we spoke a little bit earlier around the role of business. I get the sense that most people who look at that internal hotline, blow the whistle here, sign in the corridors of the corporate world, don't trust it. They're worried about it. They just don't believe that it's going to do what they think it should do, what it ought to do. What's your experience of that?
Hotlines are the, I always think of them as the sort of the absolute minimum that you can do. If you can do nothing else, fine, get a hotline. What you've got to remember with a hotline is very often it's outsourced to an audit company. And what you will get if you call in is somebody who is running a call center. Now, that is just not in any way, shape, or form the kind of support that a whistleblower needs. It's not the emotional support. It's not the legal support. It's not assessing the case. It's not thinking about what the options are for raising those concerns, possibly outside that company. Maybe there's an ombud. Maybe there's a regulator. It's a job that is just not a call center job. And I think that honestly, if you're in a workplace where you just, that's all you can manage, I guess it's better than nothing. Yeah. But I'm not even sure that it is better than nothing, because it provides this veneer of, don't worry, corporate governance, got it under control, guys. Whereas what those call centers are really doing are looking for points at which the company is leaking money. And they're like, oh, okay, our shareholders need to know that we are stepping in and, stopping whoever it is in whichever department, and we're, protecting shareholder value. Is that really enough? No. I think companies really do have to rethink that. A lot of companies they understand the concept of whistleblowing as being helpful to them, but very often whistleblowers themselves seem to be perceived as difficult. They're difficult. They don't go along to get along. They don't play the game. And it's something that comes up again and again, where even where a company is very outspoken about your own ethical code, and it just the problem comes up again and again. So if business were prepared to put money into external measures, external organizations, that seems to me far more of a useful way forward than to rely on a call center, which really I don't think can do the job. Yeah,
I get that and agree with you. And I want to come to Mandy. You reflect a bit on how corporates just don't do enough, even when people do blow the whistle. It doesn't reach the directors. Up to half of the cases where people are reporting, they're not even investigated properly, and then that information doesn't even reach the boards, and there's just no justice here.
Yeah, and that was a finding that was of a research study done that shows that when people do report, it doesn't even reach director level. So I spend a lot of time also looking at this issue of the hotlines, because a lot of companies will say, oh, we've got an outsourced hotline, one of the big auditing firms run it, and you know, as Alison says, corporate governance, you know, we've ticked that box. So the problem we've got with these hotlines is that what often happens from the accounts of the whistleblowers is that once they have made this whistleblower tip off to the hotline, then it triggers a witch hunt within the company. Yeah. If they give the right information, then the company will start doing an investigation and they will start a witch hunt for the person responsible for leaking the information. But with most of the hotlines, what I've been told is that the whistleblowers are so concerned about identifying themselves that they don't hand over enough of the right information. So it's very superficial. They'll say, oh, there's a fraud in this department, but the investigators then can't contact them because they haven't given their identity and they don't know exactly what kind of information the investigators need. So there's no point really to the tip-off and it doesn't go anywhere. So that obviously is a serious concern. What really needs to happen is there needs to be a change to the stigma of whistleblowing in these corporates. There needs to be a speak up culture where whistleblowing is encouraged, where these big corporates are telling whistleblowers or potential whistleblowers, it's okay, come forward and you'll not be seen as a troublemaker. Because that's what happens, is they're seen as disloyal to the company, when in fact what they're doing, as Cynthia says, is protecting the company. And that's why so many of these whistleblowers can't get jobs again. You know, most of the whistleblowers that I've interviewed have been left financially decimated. They cannot get jobs because you Google their names and immediately people go, what? We're not hiring this one. She's trouble. You know, just look what happened to Bianca Goodson, who got a job at Sage after she was at Trillian. And then as soon as she blew the whistle, they were like, no, actually, this is a bit hot for us. No, thank you. And now she can't get a job. Which is crazy. You know, you should rather have these corporates hiring people, as you say, as their ethics officers, and saying, well, here's somebody who is clearly absolutely driven by virtuous motivation and justice, and you know, we should have them on our board. And that just isn't happening. Yeah.
No, I get that so much. It is almost a box ticking exercise, and then this weird notion that, oh, who's blowing the whistle? Let's go and hunt them down, find out who it is. We don't want people like that in the organization. Whereas this should be embraced. Sorry, I think we might have lost Alison. I hope she pops back in. Alison, if you're there. But I want to get onto this notion of, so how do we turn that around? And here's a view that we've been discussing at OUTA. You know, to try and get a corporate charter that says to the boards of every company, why don't you sign this charter? It's got a number of things that drives real ethics and change the whole corruption landscape by saying, if there is corruption in this organization that I'm a board member of, I will resign. Now, imagine you say that, and you say, but first and foremost, to all your employees, well, I'm a director of this organization, and this is what I've stated. I will step down if there's any corruption, substantive, meaningful corruption, obviously, that is exposed in this company that I'm a board member. I don't want to be part of it. Now imagine all board members signing that. What's the first thing they're going to do? I think when you put this to the corporates, the normal reaction is, oh no, you know, why we don't want to resign. Well, of course we don't want to resign. So what are you going to tell the people? Here are all the mechanisms that are going to expose corruption. We're going to embrace them. We're going to make sure that if anyone in this organization is corrupt, you will be rooted out, not me. I'm not going to resign as the director. We will take action and we will make sure that it doesn't happen. And it's like turning itself on its head. You know, you now put the onus right at the top that this is if you're serious about it, this is what you're going to say. And I think people will change their behavior quite quickly. Your thoughts on that, Cynthia?
I'll take that one. Thank you, Wayne. I'm currently, most of my work is volunteer work, by the way. So I'm volunteer to work with Accountability Now. And they currently actually have drafted a pledge, which they want to put out. I think it will be done by either the end of this year or next year. Exactly what you're saying, Wayne, to give to those CEOs and executives and corporates and in government that they sign this pledge that if I hold this position and there is any corruption in it, then yes, I need to be dealt with, you know, and there will be rules and whatever the organization. So I think that will hold them to some sense of accountability, and it's much, much needed. What I'm seeing now is that board members are making a career out of being board members. So they're on so many boards, they're earning money, they add no value. Some of them fall asleep at board meetings. They allow corruption to happen right under their watch, and yet they're earning money from it. And then people like me, I've literally decided this is what I want to do. I want to help board levels. I went to study certified directors course through the Institute of Directors. And although I'm sitting on 3 boards, which is non-profit, I don't own anything, but every board position I apply for that is money earning, I get no response whatsoever. So you can already see how the thinking is. So it's really going to be difficult, and it would be great if they could bring in that sort of mechanism where the board member has to pledge that they will try their best to prevent corruption and not be part of it.
Yeah, excellent. I like that, and that's a good thing to do. And part of that pledge, which we're also working on something similar, so we need to chat about this, is to get every manager of every operation. So you get these multinational organizations, you get these branches throughout the country, and lo and behold, you start to find that in order to up the profits of a beverage making company, for instance, in a town or a city, they've done a deal. Some manager in the past has done a deal with the local municipality to reduce their water consumption costs or rates, or electricity for that matter. Society is worse off because somebody has to pick up that cost somewhere. Somebody's profiteering out of it. So we need this charter to flow to every manager to say, you know, for instance, I need to tick this box that says my branch, my business is paying the right amount for water, the right amount for electricity. We have not entered into any deals with local government to reduce our property tariffs and so forth. Because when you start asking those questions and managers have to put their signatures to that question, then things happen. Because when you ask the staff the same question, and staff that might have left will say, things aren't the way they are. And so we've got to drive this ethics, and that will rely on whistleblowers saying, well, this company that I used to work for signed this charter, but actually they shouldn't have, because they're not in that zone. They're not as squeaky clean. Here's some evidence. And we would love the whistleblower process to flow there. What are your thoughts on that, Mandy? You're on mute.
Sorry. Well, I suppose, again, you know, it comes down to a culture within an organization, and whether or not they're willing to abide by any kind of charter that they do sign. And you know, it's all good and well. We know in this country that sometimes, you know, the charter will be signed, but will it be abided by? And that's the real concern, I think, for a lot of people, that there is accountability. And that's been one of the big issues about the Protected Disclosures Act, for example, is that there is no accountability for corporates, that they, even when they are whistleblowers, and there are quite clear stipulations in the law for what companies have to do, they don't necessarily even do them because there is no accountability. That's been the major criticism, that there's no organization going around checking to see if they are actually implementing what they're supposed to do. So I like the idea of a charter. It is a good idea, but again, it comes from the culture of the leadership within these different companies and organizations, and about changing that culture within, that whistleblowers are encouraged. And that comes from society as well. The way that society stigmatizes whistleblowers and views them. And you know, I make the point as well that in the States, often whistleblowers they're lauded, they're celebrated. You know, there was a movie made about Catherine Gunn. Everyone knows who Edward Snowden is, but not everybody knows who Cynthia Stimpel is. Not everybody knows who all the state capture whistleblowers are. And that's because they're not placed on a pedestal in this country. And many of the suggestions are that they should be given national orders. They should be praised by the president, that they should be placed on a pedestal and celebrated. And that's, again, about how society needs to change the way that we perceive whistleblowers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you raise a good point, Jan. I remember Praveen Gordhan in Parliament, I think, apologizing to you, Cynthia, for Treasury not doing what they should have done. You went to them, you gave them information, they did nothing. But I think that's not enough. What he should have done was assessed the impact that this has had on your life. You should have been offered a promotion and a job back at SA. Not saying you would have taken it, probably not, but compensated somehow for it, because it took civil society to help you get there. In fact, we want to send the DPE a bill for having to take Duvenage to court and have it declared a delinquent director. You know, civil society is doing the work that government should be doing, that these boards should be doing, because the boards of these SOEs now, they have all the facts, they've got the minutes of the meetings, they've got the contracts. They should be the ones laying the charges against the perpetrators who brought these organizations down, and yet they don't. They sit back and carry on and change the boards, and we have to go and do this hard and dirty work, which is costly and time consuming. We don't mind doing it, but it's a madness that we should. I want to turn to a couple of questions. Devosha Mamutli Vera, thanks. I think she says, you know, there should be more civil society organizations to hold private prosecutions, and that's a whole different discussion. We were talking amongst our exco this morning around our space there. The law is very clear on private prosecutions. Unless you get a nollie prosecute certificate from the NPA, there's nothing you can really do. And then there's who was actually harmed, and that person has to bring the case. It's more individualized, but the law needs to change it. So we agree, Devotion, on that. June Bellamy talks about this delinquent director and boards that we need to take up more of these cases in order to pursue these individuals that perpetuate these crimes. So again, thanks for that, June. It speaks exactly to what we believe is very, very necessary. And then I want to come back to what you were talking about just now, Mandy, when you said, the corporates might not really want to go and sign this charter, but there is the power of the consumer. So imagine the powers put down to the consumer. Here's the green list of organizations that have signed these charters. They've carried out the process, and these are the people you should be buying your goods and your services from. Now we can start a whole conversation around consumer power. Where do you buy your goods from? Is it those organizations that have gone beyond profits as usual, that have now decided to put funds into this whistleblower home or house, for instance, around charters, around meaningful call centers? There's quite a few things that we can do there, and these are things that are in our discussion hub at the moment to just keep fostering and taking this conversation to where it should, because I think South Africa can lead in so many respects in the space of whistleblowing. We're quite unique here in the extent of corruption, the Gupta leaks, the state capture issues, and we've got an opportunity to turn this country around. And that's going to be very difficult unless we get more people on board.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, you know, like I'm not sure that there is sufficient appreciation within society for whistleblowers. I've seen the reception to my book. Some people have been very cynical about it and saying, well, a lot of these whistleblowers are complicit. They shouldn't be considered whistleblowers. I think we've become, in a way, so jaded about corruption that we suspect that there is always a sinister motive, even for people that are blowing the whistle for altruistic and virtuous reasons. They still suspect that there is an axe to grind, or there is some kind of an agenda. And in some instances there may be. In some instances it's self-preservation, and I make that very clear, and that it is by people that have got a proximity. So the idea of consumers voting with their money, and where which companies they decide to frequent. I don't know if there is sufficient mobilization among society to support whistleblowers, because in South Africa they're still seen to a large degree as being problematic. So I don't think that would work. I think people would just be like, well, there's so many other issues. But if we are seriously going to deal with corruption and how deeply systemic corruption is, then we need good people to stand up. That's the only way it's going to work. And we have to encourage good people to stand up and to not look the other way. And as things stand at the moment, you're going to have good people choosing to remain silent, and through their silence they will become complicit, because the risk is just too high for them to speak up.
Yeah. No, without a doubt. Sorry, Alison is having technical difficulties, so we've lost her for the moment. If she does come back, that'll be great. So we'll carry on, because we've got a few minutes left. We've got a couple of questions, and then we want to announce the winners of your book. I just want to go into this space a little bit around so often, and in one or two cases in your book as well, people are caught in the trap, and they're actually part of the problem before they realized, oops, they're on the wrong ship. They should have known a lot earlier, and then have to jump into the new space. And then you find that they're actually tried, and they find themselves as not really being in the whistleblower space from a corporate point of view when they're challenged, and yet they were. Better late than never, I suppose, on that spot, Mandy. And then I want to come to you on the same question there, Cynthia, because in your space there was quite a lot of dynamics that were at play as you were going down this road. Where do you draw the line? I suppose that's a question for you, Mandy.
So this has been the big issue that people have been reacting to, is people will look at the cover of my book and say, well, why is this person being profiled? Are they a whistleblower? And I believe that there is a spectrum of whistleblowers. In Alison's absence, I will tell you that she disagrees with me on this. But the way that I see it is that you've got whistleblowers that are compelled to speak up because they just can't live with the fact that there is something wrong that is happening, and they have to do the right thing, and they wouldn't be able to live with themselves. They're driven by the pursuit of justice. Somewhere in the middle, you've got accidental whistleblowers who realize that they are a witness to a problem, and if they remain silent, they will become complicit, and they are forced into becoming whistleblowers. They didn't set out to become whistleblowers. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people who have a proximity to wrongdoing, who were involved, and then they may have a Damascus moment. They decide that actually what they were doing was wrong. And Angelo Agriti, on his own admission, is one of these. He's said it himself today, his lawyer saying it in court. And he remains a whistleblower because the information that he's provided is still valuable to knowing about the corruption and the wrongdoing. So I think it's important to understand that you don't discount their contribution as whistleblowers merely because they were involved in the wrongdoing.
Yeah. Just because it got too hot in the kitchen for them, I think even more so sometimes it's extremely brave to take that step, knowing that, you're giving yourself up, you're handing yourself in, you're going to possibly be jailed for the role that you did play at the time, and yet the information is extremely valuable.
So Angelo Agriti today, this is exactly the topic of conversation in court, where they're saying it's his information that he disclosed to the Zondo inquiry that is being used to prosecute him in this matter with Vincent Smith. So that's actually a very current argument.
Yeah. Amazing, yeah. Cynthia, in your journey, I mean, your own colleagues, the people that you worked with, that you had conversations with, that you were friends with, suddenly turning their back, ignoring you. What was that like? I mean, and what did you have to say to them?
Thanks, Wayne. I just want to talk quickly on your previous question, is that there is this vast spectrum. So I feel I cannot judge a whistleblower at the time that they whistle blew. And really, it's when that person's conscience dictates to them, I need to do it now, they will do it. And so I guess I come from that perspective that I'm not going to judge at when or how or the level. But when you whistleblow, the fact is that people really, it still has that negative connotation. That even your friends, in my case, friends that I had over the years, my own staff that I worked with for all the years I was at SA, up to today, not a single one of them have called me to find out how I'm doing or to listen to the story. The initial was, oh, we see you in the newspaper. And then I'll say, yes, do you want to have a chat and we can discuss it and over coffee? And then you hear nothing. So, yes, I think people don't want to be associated with the whistleblower because it's seen as negative. One or two friends remained friends because they were genuine and were concerned for my welfare, but others just stuck away. And the strange thing is, after everything happened with SAA, so it was my case, then it was the CEO and CFO being fired, then it was the Zondo, then it was the delinquent director. So, and they were all focused on the cases happening at the time that my case came up. And only one or two people said you are vindicated, but no one else. They still keep their distance. So it's like the word pariah, leprosy, they're going to be contaminated. They don't want to touch you. They don't want to be associated with you. So that's really, and that's
maybe a bit of guilt feeling that they weren't there to support you, that they didn't, they're feeling a bit ashamed.
Could well be. But if they reached out and spoke to you and discussed it, I don't think any whistleblower would be holding it against that person. Right. But they're probably feeling that on their side. I remember when I once gave a talk at the Daily Maverick, people came afterwards to chat to me. One lady said to me, she said, thank you for giving us the permission to speak up. And that touched me because I thought nobody gives you the permission. You do it. But the fact that she said that showed me that she needed someone out there to show her that it's okay to speak out, that someone will get through this. And that touched me because I realized that people need to know that it's okay. And they need to know that there are others like me out there, that I'm not going to be the only person.
Absolutely. So in a couple of minutes, give us, if the whistleblowers out there now, Cynthia, what advice do you give them?
I will still encourage you to speak up, firstly. Our country needs you. We're in such a state, such a turmoil, that we're at the bottom, we're literally at the dregs of the country's life. And for us to lift ourselves up, we need citizens to be ethical and citizens to speak up. And I'm personally pledging that I will help anyone. I can't help you financially, but I will try and find the finance and try and find the mechanism for people to protect them, to speak up, and to hold them in that space. So my words is, I know that we've all gone through a lot, but I'm encouraging you now. Our country needs you. Thank you.
Great. Lovely. No, thanks for those words. And when you do, get as much information as you can, because so often, as you found, when you're being pushed out, when people start suspecting you, it's hard to get the information afterwards. Get copies, get as much information you can, because the more you have of the facts, without putting yourself into danger or jeopardy, the stronger you are as this whistleblower. Yeah. Closing comments from yourself, Mandy?
So I think it's really important that people aren't dissuaded from blowing the whistle, that they don't look at these stories of the other whistleblowers that have gone before and think, well, I'm not doing this, I'm not putting myself through this, because it's so important that we encourage whistleblowers to come forward, because it's so imperative. But there are a few things you can do if you are considering becoming a whistleblower. And I asked every single one of the whistleblowers that I interviewed for the book for some advice. So some of it is practical, like keep a diary, make sure you keep all of the phone records, make sure you keep all of the documents, as you say. Captain Kirk, who was the ETOL's whistleblower in the chapter in which you're mentioned, I mean, he's got some great advice. He remains anonymous till today. Just some technical stuff about how to email and IP addresses, things like that. But then it's also make sure you get really good legal advice. Make sure you go to the right organizations to support you and you understand how it all works. And make sure that you have your family and your support system in place as well, because that's going to become absolutely crucial. And that you realize the risk that you face, but also the enormous contribution that you can make. Every one of us has got the capacity to be a whistleblower. And it's about pushing you over the line to make the right decision, which is why I say that you need to really stack the cards in the favor of whistleblowers if you're going to encourage people to come forward.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much for that. And, we hope that the viewers have enjoyed this insightful discussion. I just want to thank you to Alison, Tilley as well, who's sorry she had to dropped off, but we got a lot of good insights from Alison, to you, Cynthia, and to Mandy for participating as well today. Just to say that OUTA is an organization that's extremely grateful to whistleblowers. We recognize the importance of that role that they play. So we have to do so much more as civil society to make it easier for whistleblowers to come forward. And I today, just in this discussion, have learned so much and got some great ideas and thoughts about how do we do that? How do we protect whistleblowers more? How do we put in place stronger mechanisms, support, change the law, help them keep their jobs? In fact, one of the questions that I see coming forward here from, I think it was Florencia, is let's take stronger action against companies that go after and make it difficult for whistleblowers to blow the whistle, that really make their lives hell. That shouldn't be the case. So, for our side, you're so important to us, and I've learned so much from you, Cynthia, right in the beginning, because as we set out and grew out into this new space, we realized the power of whistleblowing. And one of our earliest cases was at FNB, not the FNB, the BNP Capital case from at SAA, which you brought to us, and how we made an extremely successful case of that with the input that you gave us. And just to advise whistleblowers, you can go into our website at outa.co.za, because there we have a secure, very secure Whistly platform that allows people to remain anonymous, give us as much information, and it's just so important that we allow people to be anonymous. So thanks to everybody. I hope that this was an insightful discussion. I just want to announce the winners of Mandy's book in the giveaway. Khalid Kalant, you are a winner. Then we have Myberg and Jitender Singh. You are all winners of our book, and we'll be getting in touch with you to make sure that we get the book to you as soon as possible. So thanks again to everybody for participating. It was a great show. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks again, Mandy. Thanks again, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Go well and have fun.